Prevention and early diagnosis is critical for vascular conditions, and DermaFlow has developed a technology that can help reveal the earliest signs. DermaFlow CEO, Dr. Irene Jaffe, is with us to explain. Dr. Jaffe, thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much, Kim.
So DermaFlow was initially the brainchild of an electronics engineer who specialized in electronic measuring systems, now mainly in the heavy industry, such as the oil industry, but he wanted to have a bigger impact, right? And he discovered how electronic measuring could be applied to the medical industry. What was that aha moment for Ilya Skoletsky, your co-founder, where he said, hey, I'm going from heavy industry and oil to medical to apply what I know?
Actually, that's a great question. And it wasn't an immediate transition from heavy industry to the medical industry. Actually, in between, Ilya had immigrated to Israel. So a new country, a new life. And here in Israel, he started to work with physiological measuring systems, more from the electronics point of view, but nevertheless. And that got him super interested in the whole gamut of what one could do with electronic measuring systems in healthcare, and in particular for physiological parameters. And at that point, he was reading a lot. He was working with a team of researchers in the university, and he got very interested in peripheral blood flow, sometimes known as the blood flow in your capillaries or your microcirculation. And he realized that, based on his skill and his experience and previous work that had been done, he thought that he could develop very simple but yet elegant and cost-effective electronic arrays, which would be sensors essentially, and would be able to sense in a very effective way the blood flow directly under your skin, which is your capillary blood flow. And that's how this whole story began.
And at what point did you step into the ring? How did you discover Ilya and what he was working on?
Well, at that point, Ilya was in a technological incubator trying to develop this idea and concept into devices or prototype devices. And he actually had, at that point that I met him, he had one or two early devices. I immediately understood the potential of the peripheral blood flow across the board for healthcare. And I thought it was extremely exciting and riveting, actually. At that point, I didn't realize just how challenging a platform technology is. That is a technology that has so many applications. But I started coaching Ilya. Ilya knew nothing about the business end or and even prior to the actual business end of marketing and selling or anything of that nature, he didn't really know very much about positioning a new innovation. And also there was always this question of, okay, I have this technology and I've created devices and sensors, but now how do I go about, my first application and moving it forward? And that was the point where I joined Ilya.
That is one of the biggest issues that we see in all of innovation. It's where someone who you would consider the technical genius discovers something, and then they don't have that marketing piece. And you can have the best technology in the entire world, but if you don't have the right marketing arm or marketing genius, you're not going to get the product out there.
Yeah, Kimmy, I how true that is. And even prior to marketing, actual marketing in the market, there's the selection from a research or a clinical point of view of where you're going to focus. And then, of course, part of that decision is, well, how will the marketing look? How easy will it be? How easy will it be to facilitate? What will be the acceptance on the part of patients, users, on the part of physicians? There's a lot of questions to ask, and those are challenges. I mean, DermaFlow is in my personal experience, it's my second startup with a platform technology. So I'm quite familiar with this challenge, but I'd like to say it never gets easier, but the journey is always exciting. And that's, I think, the way you have to look at it.
What was the greatest lesson you learned in your previous startup that you were able to apply here and do right?
Great question. I think the people who you team with. And I know that, you know, any of you out there
that is so important.
Anybody who's been part of a startup knows just how important that ingredient is. It's oftentimes much more important than the technology itself. But I think I learned the hard way that it's so important in the earliest phase to put together, number one, to have founders that work well together, not too much ego, a lot of cooperation and collaboration, and also bringing in different skill sets and being able to mesh them together and to, you know, sort of work off each other rather at each other. And that was one of the things. From a technological point of view, I think one of the lessons that I learned was when you do have a platform, be very critical early on of, you know, the applications you try, or even if you try them with partners, and keep asking the same questions like, what are my goals with this application? Where can it get me, you know, in a timely way, et cetera, et cetera. That's another thing I learned in the first startup.
Wow, that's amazing. So when you met Ilya and the incubator, you said that you saw huge potential, all kinds of applications that were possible using this type of technology. How did you focus on one? And I'm going to ask you to brainstorm on some of those ones where your eyes lit up and you're like, oh, it can be used for this and it can be used for this, but oh, you know, let's just, as much as I hate to do this, we got to just focus. And what was that focus?
Well, I wish it was that simple, Kimmy. That's how these things progress. In our hands, we actually tried, I'd like to say, a whole bunch of things, but, you know, in a certain framework. It wasn't like, you know, anybody who came to us with an idea, we said, oh yeah, let's go for that. Although sometimes it was hard to restrain ourselves because it was so far flung and it was interesting, but we just knew it wasn't, you know, it was not the right application, certainly not the right first tier application. So I would say that things evolved. You know, there is a bit of sort of trial and error. Even if you're asking the right questions, there's a bit of trial and error. There are things that you cannot know until you actually do them, or even test them in the clinic. And a case in point for this was one of the earlier applications was for ICU, so acute care. And actually we winded up at least not at this point in time, continuing that. But we saw great promise for early detection of ICU patients in a variety of different situations when they started deteriorating, and this wasn't yet being picked up by all the very, you know, macrovascular parameters that are typically being measured. We saw a real role for DermaFlow's microvascular parameter, and, you know, that we could pick up things early. We had some early clinical testing, or, you know, trials that attested to that. But when we started to look more comprehensively at this question and actually do a further study, we understood that sometimes the goal of your study, the way you want to build your study, and the actual way to get there is not always doable, at least not in a simple way. And time was always one of the parameters that we were very cognizant of. So
there's always a balance between the path of least resistance, but also the path of least regulation. You got to pick the path of least resistance and path of least regulation to market if you're going to be successful.
Absolutely. In this particular case, it wasn't even a regulatory question. It was a question of how you build in your eligibility criteria to choose your patients for the study. So it would, at the end of the day, reflect the goals you desired for the study. And it just turned out that it was much more cumbersome, much more difficult than we anticipated. And wasn't something that we felt would move as quickly as we wanted. So yes, so that's some of the types of challenges that you meet, with.
And that is really challenging because, also some of the most challenging can be the most rewarding. If someone's sitting there in the ICU and something that you have could make a huge difference, that's really rewarding and so impactful. But sometimes you got to take a step back in order to have the most widespread impact.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
And so where did you decide to end up focusing?
So we decided we left, or actually we didn't leave, because I do believe we will be going back to the acute care area, but we did put it on the back burner for now. Even though, and this is pre-COVID, even though with the COVID, this whole area of acute care and sepsis has really come to the forefront. But
Yes.
Nevertheless, we put it on the back burner, and it's still on the back burner. And we decided to go into the area of chronic care, which, if you compare just the potential markets for chronic care and acute care, chronic care is so much more larger. It's probably about 10 times as large. So it's a huge area of chronic care. We all know chronic care entails subsegments, which, everything from diabetes to cardiovascular disease to peripheral arterial disease, which is an area which we're in, and I'll go into that in a little bit more detail, et cetera, et cetera. So we decided to backtrack because we had done some early studies in the vascular. When I say vascular, I mean vascular insufficiency, such as peripheral arterial disease. We did some studies that really did show promise, but it was in very early stage, and we were still evolving, this whole thing of which applications we really need to pick, and so forth and so on. We were doing, a variety of different studies to be able to make those decisions. So we went back and we re-looked at that, and then we started talking to experts in the vascular area. Together with that, at the same time, we understood from the earlier study that we did that we could actually create some new intellectual property and develop further methodology to work with the technology that we had already developed. And so the area, again, just to emphasize once again, the area we are in right now is peripheral arterial disease, sometimes called peripheral vascular disease. It is termed, coined the silent killer. And this is also, people, I think there's much more awareness of cardiovascular disease. When we talk about peripheral vascular disease, I think there's a lot less awareness. Also, little known to most people that 50% at least of people who have peripheral arterial disease they're asymptomatic. So there's no symptoms, there's no pain, they might not go and get tested for what reason, and again, so this makes this a real killer. And oftentimes by the time you do go get tested, it has deteriorated. And either it's very, very difficult to reverse it at that point, or you may have to have intervention. If it's really bad, you may be going towards, unfortunately, limb amputation and things of that sort.
So at what point during the progression of this disease is it your technology more for early detection, or is it more during the course of this person's been diagnosed to determine whether or not it's progressing slower or faster?
It's actually for all of the above.
Okay.
We have, one of our interests is definitely early screening. But together with that, we have much interest in the remote patient monitoring area. And that's also for patients who have already been diagnosed, with peripheral arterial disease, and also for patients who are not diagnosed but might be high risk or may have a lifestyle that can sort of push them towards peripheral arterial disease as time goes by. I.e., sitting for long hours, as many of us do these days in the Western world. Not watching our diets, not having enough physical exercise, smoking, et cetera, et cetera.
Do you see this as being something that if someone is sedentary, for example, if I'm sitting at my desk for 4 hours, I have, let's say, a sensor developed by you embedded in a patch that I wear on my legs, that it can alarm to say, hey, look, you're not getting any blood flow. This is going to cause long-term problems. Get up and walk.
Absolutely. Yes, totally. However, we do think that those kind of markets, which we're, super interested in those markets, very consumer type of markets. We do think, though, that they should probably follow markets which are much more patient-oriented, meaning that there are patients that already have the disease, and they would like to be able to be more responsible for their health at home. Maybe they're in the very early stages of the disease, and they could change their lifestyles. They can potentially improve their status. They'd like to see this. They don't want to just have to go to a physician every 6 months and have the physician tell them, well, this, that, and the other thing. They'd like to see if they do make changes, how this has impacted their disease status as readily as possible.
That real-time feedback is huge, especially when you're trying to make those critical lifestyle changes. There is so much change that happens inside of you that you don't see right away. And that is actually a deterrent to sticking to these lifestyle changes for the long term. So having something like this that would provide them more of that real-time feedback could have a huge impact in terms of getting people to stick with those lifestyle changes, including walking, which walking is the best medicine for peripheral artery disease, as we know.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what we are, or definitely from the input that we have from the market, from even patients, from advocacy organizations such as Vascular Cures, which we're very happy to be part of. This is the input that we're getting, that people are now ready. They may certainly not have been ready a decade ago or not even 5 years ago.
Timing is everything. What is it about it today that makes the market ready for what you have to offer?
Yeah, we think that over the course of the last 10 years, quite a few things have come together and happened to allow people to understand that they can be more responsible for their health, and it doesn't have to be complicated or cumbersome. It's something that they can do. They can augment the classical healthcare programs that they've always been part of, or going to their physician, whether it's a GP or a specialist, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one thing. The other thing is that this whole area of wearables and small devices, both from the point of view of the electronics and of the size, obviously, but also of the point of view of the software, of using smart devices, having things displayed in a manner where a layman can understand, and not, having it to the layman gibberish, where professional medicalese gibberish, where he doesn't really understand what that means for him, and after all, he's the user. So these are some of the things. Certainly COVID has brought home, although as I'm trying to show, I think the stage had started to be set a lot before that, but COVID has definitely brought home this whole area of the importance of remote patient monitoring, that things can happen where you cannot go to a physician. You need to be able to have some way, some approach, some devices, whatever, to be able to take personal care of your health, at least to a point. And I think this is what has really pushed this point home.
I think the remote monitoring started way back with the initial step counter. It's progressed so far. Now I see it as something that could be integrated and have a widespread impact. The perfect use case, the Apple Watch. That could be huge. Easy integration into the Apple Watch. It already has the EKG. It has blood pressure monitoring, things like that. Why not have it monitor the blood flow in those small capillaries?
It's a possibility, although I must say we're more looking towards, because with our vascular capabilities, we have actually, as I pointed out, we've developed a methodology, not just which uses the devices that we've developed earlier. And that methodology also uses non-invasive stimulatory type of technology that's been out on the market for decades. And so, you know, if we're talking about partners, and there could be a variety of different partners for sure, of all sorts, but we definitely see, and I think it just makes sense, you know, an early partner could be a company that makes and has been in this field, you know, these stimulatory devices, and would like to see, for instance, an enlarged footprint, or, you know, increase their footprint in area, or another dimension, if you want to put it like that, in areas that they just didn't even imagine may be relevant for them. So that's one possibility. Of
right,
course,
the diagnostic and solution all in the same device.
Correct. So I like to call it therapy and diagnosis, or therapy treatment, all in one device. So that's one thing. Definitely, you know, other companies, it doesn't necessarily have to be the Apple or the Apple Watch, but other companies that are looking at physiological signs or physiological parameters that have not looked at the microcirculation, and we could, you know, integrate with them, aggregate data, and come out with even software together that speaks more to prevention, speaks more to prediction. All of that is super interesting these days. But of course, there's work that needs to be done, you know, before that with machine learning algorithms, AI, artificial intelligence. But that is definitely a direction for the future as well.
So let's just walk us through the product lineup that we're talking about. Consumers, the remote monitoring versus in-office.
So again, just, you know, we think it's wonderful that we have this whole spectrum. We like to call it the healthcare spectrum, which is from the consumer or remote home, if you will, all the way to the clinic. And the clinic could be a doctor's office, or it could be an outpatient clinic, or it could be the hospital, you know, one of the wards. So this is the spectrum. It's really rather wide. What we did at DermaFlow is we envisioned early on that if we create a product line which is modular, in other words, we'd start with a module, okay, a small module, can fit in the palm of my hand, okay, that has the capabilities of our technology, together with a sensor, obviously. Then we could, this modular concept, if you wish, we could use going forward, whether we have a tabletop type of monitor, let's say for the hospital or for a clinic, which has multiple sensors being used at the same time on various parts of the body. Or if we even have a handheld, a very simple device, which would really be, you know, would apply to only one sensor. So you'd have one module, whereas, you know, in the other, you'd have multiple modules. So this whole modular concept is really, in one way, it's very simple. In the other way, it could be applied to things in the future as well as to partners which have their own devices and their own technologies, which we can embed our module or modules into their products.
And that's probably the quickest go-to-market strategy, is to partner and integrate.
Absolutely.
And
that way we could leverage off of a partner who already has lots of experience in the market of you know, of choice.
So where are you at in your clinical trials? What are you looking for clearance on? I would imagine that you'd be looking for more of a 510K with what you're working on.
Right.
from the FDA.
Right. So again, yes, everything's non-invasive about our technology, whether we're talking about DermaFlow only or DermaVasc. I didn't use that that term before, but DermaVasc is the concept or the term that we coined to deal with using DermaFlow technology in the vascular area. So, whether we're using DermaFlow alone or DermaVasc, which use both DermaFlow and the simulatory technology, everything is non-invasive, meaning that, we're looking at a class, nothing more than a class 2. In some cases, it can be a class 1, 510K. There is, for the DermaFlow, there's actually several predicate devices. We've already chosen the one that we think is most appropriate. There's also a track, a 510 exempt track, which is a class 1. And it's been out there for a few years already, and it was put out by the FDA to deal with physiological monitoring only. So we can fit into that track. That track is good for gaining clinical data, aggregating data, but it cannot be used for using your labels or your indications on your device. So one could use both tracks and proceed quickly with the exempt 510K exempt as you're putting together your clinical study for the 510K predicate device.
Yeah.
Also, one more point is that again, this whole thing that you mentioned, Kim, about the fastest way to market is with partners for sure, and that has been our strategy. And when you deal with partners, it is, if we're talking the whole regulatory piece, is obviously part of it will be on DermaFlow, but the lion's share will be on the partner. So the partner may have his own strategy integrated with his particular device, which he wants to apply. And obviously, if it would make sense, we'd be more than happy to go that way as well.
Any of those partnerships in the works right now that you can say a name or you can allude to?
Not in the vascular area. We've been on our evolution to focusing in the vascular area. We've worked with multiple types of partners and multiple partners. Unfortunately, I can't mention that I have a confidentiality agreements with all of those, and so I can't mention them. But I can mention that it ran the gamut of everything from fibromyalgia to wound care to thermoregulation. And I think those are enough examples. So it's again, it hits the point again to the breadth of the platform. But again, I want to bring home, the important point is the breadth of the platform is the potential, but as far as executing on a particular application, that is, I think, the strength of moving forward quickly. So no, I'm sorry, I can't allude to anything specific right now.
I didn't think you could, but it's always worth asking. How do you see it, or when do you see it hitting the market? How soon and in what form factor do you see it hitting first?
So we'd like to hit the remote patient monitoring market first. I think that's the lower hanging fruit, both from a regulatory point of view, even though there's not that much difference, depending upon which indications you really want to emphasize. But we feel that the gap and the need might be greatest there, and the timing that you alluded to, which is so important. The timing is right now. And so that's where we see that. As far as how to do that, we really do feel that working with a partner would make the most sense. As far as where we are with our development and how quickly, at least I can speak to our side, not the partner side, we think that it is feasible to think about a 12 to 18 month timeline to be in the market. Of course, this depends on many other factors, but it's something at least to hope for and to reach for.
Yeah, definitely. In testing DermaFlow's product in some early studies, it became really personal, especially with Ilya's wife, who was diagnosed with peripheral artery disease. How did her involvement further the product development?
Yeah, that's actually Ilya's wife, Ina, was our first PAD subject. And it's crazy how these things sometimes, come full circle. We obviously had decided upon this focus before we knew that Ina was diagnosed with PAD. And having that diagnosis and the capabilities that we have developed just brought home, this whole personal element in it. So we actually incorporated measurements on Ilya's life in our earliest, internal clinical work. And it helped immensely because it was the first trial where we were able to show the very different patterns that we achieve when we have a healthy leg and when we have a diseased PAD leg.
Wow, and how's she doing now?
She's doing okay. I think she's not deteriorating. I think, maintaining her status, if not even a little bit improved.
And it's great, if that's what you're looking for in the next 12 to 18 months, to have something to help a patient like Ilya's wife to have remote monitoring at home so that she knows, well, I need to get checked, or I need to walk more, or I need to make other changes in my life to improve my circulation. Thank you so much, Dr. Jaffe. One more question. What is just maintaining that passion, that fire inside you for this particular product, for this particular innovation? What's just that fire inside you that's just keeping you going?
Well, I think, and again, this is my personal passion, healthcare. I think knowing that you at least have the potential to impact someone's health. And health means, better health means better quality of life. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what speaks to me. I would say that probably speaks to a lot of our team. And being able to do it in a way which is non-invasive, so the patient will not have pain or will not have a recuperation period. That just makes it all the more, satisfying.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Jaffe, CEO of DermaFlow.
Thank you, Kim.